One more. Good morning. Much better, guys. Today's propaganda coming in.
Good morning, Legacy students and staff. It is Hump Day today, Wednesday. Today is National Old Stuff Day, so we're going to salute like Mr. Schmidt, Mrs. Buss. Mr. Clements does not fall in that category. He's not old stuff yet.
Listen, please.
You guys determine who's old stuff to nationally salute them. Today is Wednesday, March 2nd. Legacy High School will be hosting the Class B Region 5 Boys Basketball Tourney on March 7th and 8th. Phy Ed and weightlifting students should visit with their teacher regarding meeting space for classes beginning after 1 p.m. on Monday. No other students are allowed in the gym areas after 1 p.m. There will be softball open gym Wednesday mornings, March 2nd, 9th, 16th, from 6 a.m. to 7:30 at the Legacy High School gym. The first official day of softball is March 21st. Please contact Coach Newstead if you are interested in playing. Juniors who missed large group U.S. history or English on Monday or have not completed pre-registration for the ACT must see their counselor this week. All juniors will be taking the ACT coming up in a couple weeks, and they need to complete the pre-registration. See your counselor if you've not done this. The boys basketball and girls basketball teams will be competing in the West Region Tournament starting tomorrow, the 3rd of March through Saturday. If you are interested in attending this event, you will be excused mods 20 and through 22, but you need a parent to call the attendance office. They play at 3 p.m. on Thursday and 3:45 for the girls on Thursday. You must check in with Mr. Clements at the event center. Have a great day.
Last day of lecture today. Go ahead, loud applause now. The expression I maybe thought was coming at me. We will be covering the end of the war today and some of the results from it. You have a driving question at the end of your guys' project that says, how did the Third Reich rise, how did the Third Reich fall, and how did it change the world? This is what we call a critical thinking question. A question that requires you to do a little bit of research, but possibly just have paid attention over the course of the quarter and give your own opinions to it. There's really not a right or a wrong answer. You could potentially say some things that don't necessarily apply, but really there are answers that can vary from all you guys. And so the nice thing about that is it proves that you've put some thought beyond the textbook, some thought beyond the terms and names, and some thought beyond the actual maybe fighting itself, but allows you to give your opinions on how you think those things happen. So keep in mind that you need to answer that question at the end of your timeline. That it doesn't have to be on your timeline, but one thing you're going to need to do is to stop and address that. That's the big critical thinking piece to this project, and the piece that really proves that you have put some thought into what you're talking about and what you understand. So today, we've got about half and half. We're about 50% of lecture, and we're going to go over some of the results, and then we're about 50% of a video near the end here, okay? And I'll let the video speak for itself near the end. But when we talk about World War II, there were a variety of things that affect the world that you live in today. We can sit here and we can say World War II is something that's in the past and it ended in 1945, and there's nothing that really affects you even though you were born in the year 2000, 2001, whatever it may be for you guys. But really, the world that we live in had a lot of effects from World War II and had a lot of things that carry over into it. And people who lived in that time and fought in that time period have helped shape the United States as well as other parts of the world. One of the most devastating parts of World War II was the actual casualties. When I say casualty, I'm referring to the people who died and the people who were wounded. That's how the military lists casualties. On the first slide here, we're going to look at some of the wounded. So take a gander at the first one here. This is World War II casualties in Europe. And each one of those little symbols that is up on there, each of those symbols represents 100,000 dead in their appropriate theater of operations. So some of the people in the top, each one of those little skulls represents 100,000, and that would be general. By a general death, that would be a population of like civilians people. People like you and I who are not inside the military. Then you're going to have a variety of military deaths represented by flags. You're going to have some red crosses right here. close to my hand up here, that represents those that died by disease or maybe infections after a wound. And then you also have some Star of Davids, and the Star of Davids are going to represent Jewish casualties and Jewish dead inside of the Holocaust as well. So it kind of breaks down Europe by those who died in those particular regions, in those particular areas of the country and inside of the continent. One of the largest that you might not be aware of, and kids usually aren't aware of in World War II, is Russia. They had a huge population in World War I, they also had a huge population in World War II, and they're going to really have the highest casualty rate. We talked about the Battle of Stalingrad, we talked about Operation Barbarossa, and those were some of the most vicious fighting during the war. And there were many other battles throughout that Eastern Front side of Russia that we didn't even address necessarily in it. So when you look at this, you're really seeing a scope of what happened on the European continent and how generations of men and women and children were really wiped out of history and really never had a chance to live out their lives and to grow their families in the way that maybe you guys will hopefully be able to. Now let's go to the Pacific. So in the Pacific theater or inside of Asia, you're going to have some also high totals. The totals for Americans in this theater are not going to be nearly what they were inside of Europe. We actually lost a lot more soldiers inside of the Europe fighting, largely because of the amount of land mass and because of the way we were fighting on land versus fighting inside of the Pacific Ocean. You'll notice the number of skulls should jump out at you right away. Again, those are civilian population. And if you look inside of China, there's hundreds of thousands of civilian people who were killed. And those were murdered by the Japanese. This is a time in history that largely doesn't get illustrated in World War II. When we talked a little bit about the rape of Nanking, and when we talked about Japan early in the PowerPoint, we didn't go in depth into this, but do understand that there was a genocide happening, and we call that the Holocaust in Europe. But there was a genocide happening in Asia and in the Pacific, and the Japanese were killing the Chinese by the hundreds of thousands because they, just like the Germans didn't view these people as desirable or didn't view them as part of their race, the Japanese also believed the Chinese were inferior to them, and they viewed them less than human in many circumstances as well. There's also some total numbers at the bottom, some flags of the Chinese because they fought each other and were in the middle of a civil war prior to and after World War II, which adds to the death totals. So we are talking a death total that's in the millions, which is almost hard and mind-boggling to really think about, but we're going to try and illustrate that to you with the video we're going to show today. Now here's another chart of casualties. This one breaks down by individual countries, so go ahead and peek at some of the countries that you're looking at. You'll notice one of the lowest ones on top of there is the United States. This is going to include some figures that are accurate and some figures that are inaccurate. Let's look at the USSR. Okay, so for the USSR total deaths, we have 6,115,000 right here listed, and then it's got a little 4 over here. It says deaths from all causes, so that's civilian and that's from soldiers as well. One thing I want you to understand is that record keeping inside of World War II was not as accurate as maybe record keeping should have been. Meaning, they didn't know who had all died in certain areas. Some bombings were so devastating, they didn't know if the people had gotten out or if the people had died because they couldn't ever find the bodies in some of these situations as well. But the figures on here are staggering. The death total and the casualty total for World War II is unlike any war that has ever been fought inside of history because of the mechanization and the accuracy of killing people that was executed by the Nazis and executed by the Japanese, and then the ferocious fighting they put up against the Allies when they went to topple those empires and keep them from fighting. This one illustrates human dislocations. I want you to look for the arrows. There's a lot going on this map, but look for the big arrows. It says displaced persons. If you need to look up a term for displaced, go ahead and do that. Displaced essentially means people who are moved from one location to another. Think of them like the Syrian migrants we've been talking about. Those are displaced people. They get moved out of Syria and they're looking for a home somewhere else. So if you look on the map, look for the gray arrows and the red arrows that illustrate the movement of people. The size of the arrow illustrates whether it's in the millions or whether it's below, or the type of person with the red arrows illustrating the Jews. So you can see there's a mass exodus after World War II of Jewish peoples moving towards Israel, the homeland that's been created for them. We know from our Middle East unit. You also have millions of people heading over in the top left up here to Canada, to the USSR, and to Australia. So there's a lot of Europeans just fleeing to get out and get to a safer country that has more stability than Europe is going to have for the years to come. The other thing I want you to pay attention inside of this map, look at the colors in Germany. Each of those colors illustrate the division of the country itself. At the Potsdam Conference and at the Yalta Conference in its beginning, they talked about making spheres of influence, and then at Potsdam they talked about making occupation zones. And they're going to divide Germany into 4 occupation zones that's going to be held by the major 4 allies, and they're going to take the city of Berlin, if you look at it in the red portion, which is the Soviet portion, they also divide that city into 4 pieces. A major consequence of World War II is the occupation of Germany, the division of Berlin, something leading to the Berlin Wall, and hostilities that are going to rise between the USSR and the United States in the Cold War period that's to come. Some of you guys were asked to pick an event for the Cold War, the beginning of the Cold War. You could pick Potsdam as the beginning of the Cold War if you wanted, because it divides up these occupation zones. You could pick the actual confrontation that takes place in Berlin, called the Berlin Blockade, or the Berlin Airlift, that happens between the USSR and the United States following World War II as well. Those would both be suitable events to talk about on your timelines for that period. So they not only divide up Germany and Berlin, but they also divide up some other third world countries. They divide up Vietnam. They split it into a North and South Vietnam, which is going to lead to the Vietnam War that the United States has allowed into fights in later. They're going to divide Korea up, which leads to North and South Korea. And if you follow anything in politics inside of Asia, North Korea has some serious issues in their conducting itself inside of the world. And so the repercussions of what happens after the war have led to other conflicts because of the way it was dealt with. The USSR was given occupation of Vietnam. The America was given occupation of South Vietnam. And same with North and South Korea. And that's going to lead to problems throughout the world. You can write this down too, please. One of the biggest things to come out is that you have 2 major superpowers emerge. So your 2 superpowers that come out of World War II, really unprecedented, have never really seen countries of this powerful magnitude before. The Americans had the atomic bomb, and then the Soviets in 1949 are going to launch their own atomic bomb inside of Kazakhstan. And so the 2 major powers to come out are the Soviet Union and the United States. Now, even though we were allies during World War II, we're going to be virtually enemies. We're never actually going to fight each other on each other's territory, but we are going to continue to be in a period of hostility and tension and almost come to war with them throughout the Cold War. Another concept we can look at, the bipolarization of Europe. Some of you might know what it means to be bipolar. Look up the term if you don't know the term. Bipolarization refers to the division of Europe. Look up here, guys, and look for a red line that starts down in the southern portions of Europe down here. That red line continues all the way up towards the English Channel. That line was called the Iron Curtain. The Iron Curtain was a division line that was imaginary that Winston Churchill talked about. It was a line that divided communism on the eastern part of Europe and democracy on the western part of Europe. This division is going to lead to 2 halves. That's where the term bipolarization comes in. There's 2 pieces to Europe here. One is a communist half. The other is a democratic half. And again, our 2 superpower countries are going to be the most influential, America on the western half and the USSR on the eastern half, and it's going to lead to conflict between these 2 countries for 60 years, literally until 1991. We're going to be at odds and the Cold War is going on. And so that's called the Iron Curtain. Here's another shot at Germany. So mostly what I said here. But if you look at the purple and the red and the blue, that's the United States, the French, and the British occupation zones. And then the green is going to be given to the USSR. And Berlin was in the green occupation zone. So that means the whole city of Berlin, which is divided up into 4 occupation zones by itself, is going to be under Soviet land-controlled area. The mission after World War II is one of reconstruction. Not punish them like they did in World War I in the Treaty of Versailles, but try and rebuild these countries and provide for them to come back stronger and be a part of the world, recognizing that we don't want to ruin the German people anymore. We don't want another worldwide depression. We want a country that can come back and participate inside the world. This event's on your timeline as well. The United Nations comes out of World War I, make sure you understand that. The League of Nations had failed in World War I to keep peace after that, and then the United Nations comes back out of that. It has a variety of components that we could spend a whole day or two on ourselves inside of a large group, so we won't go into it, but one of the biggest pieces to understand with the UN is it's supposed to have a Security Council and a peacekeeping force. Two things that the League of Nations did not have. That peacekeeping force is supposed to be able to go into other countries and stop events from happening that would lead to war. They're supposed to be able to actually prevent this from happening. It's a peacekeeping force, and I find it quite ironic that a peacekeeping force carries guns. But nonetheless, they're essentially soldiers who can stop things from happening, like when Hitler took over parts of Austria and the Sudetenland and demanded different things to happen during that time period, and Mussolini took over Ethiopia. So the creation of the UN is a huge event to come out of World War II, and it's affecting us still today because the United Nations deals with a lot of international problems in the world. Two major trials you gotta know. The Nuremberg Trials. And as you can see up here, it says crimes against humanity. For the first time in the world, they will try and sentence an actual person for a crime against human beings. In other words, what you did was a crime against humanity, not just a crime against one person, or if you shoplifted at Target, that's just a crime against a corporate store. This is a crime against all human beings, and something that humanity says is not the way you act and not something you can do. The Nuremberg trials are going to result, they have like 24 defendants, 24 people who are accused of things. They have 11 of them that are going to result in death sentences, but only 7 of those death sentences are going to be carried out. One of the more high-profile names is Goering. Goering, or G-O-E-R-I-N-G, if you want to write it down. Goering is the propaganda minister for the Nazi regime, and he'll be sentenced to death. But he held on to one of those cyanide capsules Hitler had used on himself. Hitler had given him one of those. Thank you very much. Hitler had given one of those, and he's going to take the same sort of cyanide capsule himself and kill himself before he can actually be punished. So he takes the easy way out. Huh? Goering. G-O-E-R-I-N-G. Inside of Japan, a very similar circumstance. We're going to have another trial that are sometimes called the Tokyo trials or the Japan